All right, 3 o'clock hour, The Drive on a Tuesday afternoon starts right now. Good to have you with us. We're going to chat with David Nixon here momentarily, former BYU and NFL linebacker, and we'll see what David thinks about the Taysom Hill story. David was there over the weekend, according to his Twitter profile, and watching the Vikings beat the Saints, but watching Taysom Hill make history, literally make history. First player in NFL history, I think it's a 50-yard pass, 20-yard rush, 20-yard receiving, something like that. It was something historical. That's all I know. Taysom Hill made history over the weekend. And the question I think everybody's asking is just how sustainable it is. So we'll talk some BYU football too, but it's a really fun story about a local kid who a lot of people know really well. And not many people know him much better than our next guest. He is David Nixon, back on The Drive on a Tuesday. David, Happy New Year, man. How are you?
Hey, Spence, what's going on? Happy New Year, you too.
So I want to talk some BYU in just a little bit, but I want to start with Taysom because I know you were there, and it's just such a unique story. You know, I had a mentor of mine a number of years ago say, you know, he used to tell me, like, go wherever you go get employment, make sure you carve out a job for yourself, even if the job is not conventional. And look, we have never seen what Taysom is doing. It's literally historical, David. So first of all, give us your vantage point since you were there live, and then I want you to talk about whether or not you think this is sustainable in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, it was, as far as Sunday goes, it was an incredible environment. I mean, playoff football in the NFL is just about as electric as it gets when it comes to any type of postseason, I think. And then you throw on the top of it the fact that, you know, the Minnesota Miracle from a few years ago in the NFC Championship game that they faced off, and so there was some revenge factor as well. But to be honest, the game was very flat. Saints caused that turnover early and only got 3 points off it, and this offense struggled to get anything going until really Taysom came in and had a big run on third down, and then was able to convert that long pass the very next down, and then was a lead blocker for the touchdown. And so it was fun to watch, and the whole crowd got pumped up. It was electric in there. And then later in the game, we scored the touchdown as well. And it's a crazy story. I think it's documented. My little sister's married to Taysom, so his family's my brother-in-law. But we all just kind of laugh about how his story, right? As a kid who went undrafted, everyone knew he was capable of being a star athlete, but not a lot of GMs were taking a risk on him because of injuries, because of his age, and because of his position. You know, quarterback, that's a tough one. There's only, 2 quarterbacks per team, so call it 64 quarterbacks, maybe a little few more in the NFL. So not a lot of positions to play at that one. But for him to go in, Green Bay, cut by Green Bay, picked up by the Saints, first year kind of a practice, well, he was on the roster, but kind of an inactive, active type player, special teamer, to all of a sudden being thrusted in more and more week in and week out to all of a sudden this last playoff game where he was the main offensive threat. I mean, he led the team in rushing yards. And so it was fun to witness it in person, and watch him go off, and they didn't really have an answer for him. And it was really interesting. I ran into Maurice Jones-Drew, who was doing the pregame show for, I think it was Fox. And I ran into him at the hotel, and we were chatting about Taysom. And he said that before the game he had talked to the Minnesota Vikings coaches, and they said that they had no answer for Taysom because they never know where Sean Payton's going to line him up. Is it going to be fullback? Is it going to be tight end? Is it going to be quarterback, receiver, slot, whatever it may be? He's all over the field. And so for them, they have an answer for everybody on the field except for him. He's really that joker, that wild card. And sure enough, it played out that way. They struggled containing him, and he's able to go off.
So moving forward, David, because it is such a unique situation where so many things had to kind of line up for Taysom, and then to his credit, he had to capitalize on this opportunity. Can he carve out a niche in the NFL by doing what he's doing right now, or do you think ultimately he does have to settle in and decide whether or not he wants to be a quarterback?
I think it's all based on the system. I mean, listen, he's a restricted free agent, so this is last year of his contract, and negotiations will start here pretty soon with his agent and with the Saints, and I imagine with quite a few other teams. Depending on the team and what they want him to do, it'll kind of dictate what position he falls into. But the Saints have shown clearly that they like to utilize him all over the field. But could he go to another team and they say, no, we only want you to play quarterback, or no, we only want you to play tight end and be kind of a flex tight end, halfback type player? we'll see. But the nice thing is he got film, and he's shown that he can play all over the field. I know he wants to be a quarterback first, and that's his desired position. And I think by that long throw that he had in the game, he shows he has the arm strength and he has the talent to do it. I think Lamar Jackson, he's a great comp or case study on why Taysom can be successful. You look at what he's doing for Baltimore, and so. I think the kind of dual threat quarterback is starting to reemerge in the NFL. I know, a few years ago when you had RG3, he got hurt and it kind of went away for a few years. But I think, like I said, with Lamar Jackson, what he's doing and with Taysom, what he's able to do, you might see a reemergence of it. But it's going to be a fun offseason to see what happens with him. I know he's excited. I know he wants to stay in New Orleans. He's grown to have a pretty strong relationship there with Peyton and with Drew Brees and the whole defensive guys, everybody. But ultimately, it's going to come down to who's willing to compensate him the most and kind of what the best fit is for him.
And that's actually where I wanted to follow up. And David Nixon is our guest, former BYU NFL linebacker. David was there at the Superdome to watch the Vikings beat the Saints, but Taysom Hill was really the story. A lot of people talking about it. And David, social media is not real life, but if you follow Taysom on social, he appears to really be enjoying himself, and he's got that big smile on the sideline. Like, what has he expressed to you or maybe your sister about how much fun he's having and the relationship he has been able to cultivate with Sean Payton and Drew Brees? Yeah,
listen, he's having a blast, and we talked a lot about it. For him to, like you said, carve out this role. And really, you think about it, for the offensive coaching staff to put this much trust in him to go out there and line up at almost a different position every play shows his ability to pick up an offense, obviously, and be able to go in there and execute kind of all over the field. But I think that's his first and foremost preference is probably to stay there and work something out with the Saints. And listen, the New Orleans city loves him. And it's crazy because you walk around the stadium on game day, and there's a ton of number 7 Hill jerseys walking around. The people locally love him there. And, we had Uber drivers and everything that were asking us why we're in town. And we told them, well, we got family. And we told them, and they were like, oh, my gosh, we love them, And you're walking through, after the game, we're walking back to our cars with them, and people are all trying to get his autograph, everything like that. It's just, once again, it kind of makes us chuckle a little bit because of his history and where he came from, and it's fun to see him take off. But, I think at the end of the day, he just wants to be on the field. And you watch him on game day, the guy's a gamer, and he loves to compete. And so any opportunity anywhere to get on the field and play as many snaps as possible, I think is obviously the route he'll go. But I think first and foremost, staying in New Orleans. They bought a home there just last year, and so they've tried to make it home. But that's why I think this offseason is so intriguing, especially the way it ended, right? With this playoff game being his last game going into a contract year, the way he played, it only adds more intrigue to it.
Now, the most important question, David, is did Taysom ask you for permission to marry your sister?
I think he asked my dad mainly. I think he floated it by me. So I knew Taysom prior to them getting married, obviously. Yeah, no, we chatted about it. And he's a great kid. I wouldn't want anybody else as a husband to my little sister, but he's a stud, and they're living a great life down there right now. And he'll be back here in a couple of weeks for the off season. He's a big golfer, so we'll get out and golf quite a bit. But I'm excited for him. He's got quite the opportunity in front of him, and like I said, each year he's become more and more of an integral part of that offense. And I'm assuming that if they sign him to a 2 or 3 year deal, whatever it may be, he'll continue to be more and more involved because, he's shown that he's capable and able to go out there and put up big numbers.
Let's get some thoughts on BYU from you, David, before we set you loose. And we'll look back before we look forward. And I think there's some really exciting things to look forward to. But a 7-6 season, we chatted with Riley Nelson yesterday, and it was just kind of odd. I don't think it was good. I don't think it was bad. I just think it was odd. There were some really good wins. There were some really bad losses. And there was some fun storylines. There were some strange storylines. It's a very unique season for the Cougars, ending with the bowl loss to Hawaii over in Oahu. How would you just big picture characterize, David, the season that was before we look forward to the season that will be next year?
Yeah, I think odd's a pretty good word. I think it's just a season that is one to forget. It's just one of those ones where, yeah, you had the ups of USC and Tennessee and overtime games, exhilarating. and then you followed up with getting smashed by Washington. But I think all BYU fans were fine at that point. 2-2, you played some really good competition. Now you're entering the part of the schedule where you should beat your USF and Toledo's, and of course BYU lays an egg both times there, and you have Zach Wilson getting hurt. I mean, it just was a really, I think it was a tough season because there was no consistency. And I think that's something moving forward for this BYU team is they've got to be consistent. You've got to win the games you're supposed to win. And I think BYU fans are fine losing the games you're probably supposed to lose, like the Washington game where they came in and clearly from the kickoff, BYU was overmatched. And then I think year in, year out, it'll be fun to pick off a game like USC a few years ago was Wisconsin. I think BYU fans will be fine with that. But what I don't think BYU fans are fine with is losing games like I said, USF Toledo, and then having a 2-game losing streak to 2 Mountain West Conference teams at the end of the year. That's just not acceptable. And so if you're Kalani Sitake this year in the offseason, I think the kids, you got to preach competing to the end. And mainly this team's got to build some depth because we saw BYU. I mean, when you face this brutal schedule they face this year, and you said we'll get into it, but 2020 schedule is much more difficult than this past year's schedule is. You've got to have depth because you've seen BYU drop like flies with the type of schedule they play because you really don't have an easy bye week, especially looking forward. You don't have a bye week at all next year, really. I mean, until end of October. And it's a brutal schedule. So they've got to build that depth, and most importantly, they've got to find a way to compete and not get up for the USCs of the world, but you've got to find a way to get up for the USF Toledos and take care of business, and you move on to the next game. But it was just too much. It was a roller coaster ride this year. Too many. I think they got too high and too low, and they've got to find some middle ground there and some consistency. So it's not this all over the place type of program.
And as we look ahead to next year, David, I think they'll be better, and that's an easy thing to say because the young players will be a year older and some return missionaries will join the program and such. The news comes out that both Kyrus Tonga and Matt Bushman are going to come back, and that's big because they're pros. They're NFL guys, and they decide to stick around. But to your point, the schedule is brutal. So even though they're better, the record could look similar. So give us your take on BYU football in 2020.
I'll tell you what, this is the tough thing about independence. I mean, you look back when Tom Homo scheduled these, I guarantee when he scheduled Minnesota probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, they weren't anything like they are now. And sure enough, now you're playing at Minnesota. I think Tom probably thought, okay, a mediocre Big Ten school, mid-pack, that'd be a good game. But now Minnesota's one of the top teams in the Big Ten, especially with what they did this year. Same with Arizona State, young team coming back. I'm just looking at the schedule. At Utah, Michigan State at home, at Arizona State, at Minnesota, then Utah State at home, Missouri at home, Houston at home, and then you look at the back half of the schedule at Boise State, San Diego State, at Stanford. I mean, there's some tough games, and you only have one bye week this next year. It's going to be brutal, and that's adding Kyrus Tonga and Matt Bushman, having them come back is, like you said, it's huge. I mean, that's senior leadership. That's guys that have been there, done that. That can help these young guys. I guess if there's any positive from these injuries that BYU had this year, you had a lot of young guys playing that got that game experience that will help them move forward. I remember at one point this year, BYU had 4 freshman linebackers all on the field at the exact same time, and that's just almost unheard of. In fact, there's a stat out there that I think BYU is one of 2 schools with the most underclassmen that played this year in the entire country, and so. That helps. And Zach Wilson will be 1 year older. And we talk about this a lot. John Beck, for as good as he was his senior year, he had some growing pains his sophomore and junior year as well. And so I think Zach's continuing to learn, when to take risks, when not to, and he'll be even better coming his junior year. So I think there's a lot of optimism around this program. But like I said, it's going to have to be building some depth and getting some consistency because that schedule is, it's brutal. And once again, that's kind of the independence, right? I mean, you don't have anything really to play for besides trying to gain some national recognition. And if you can go out there and take care of business in that month of September, then you'll be ranked and you'll be talked about. But if you can't, then it could be a very long season.
Do you think it's a guarantee that Zach has the job next year, David? I know it's hard to imagine him. If he's healthy and all things being equal, I know it's hard to imagine him not being the starter. But you've heard the chatter, like I have, and everybody else, that at times it just didn't look great. I mean, is there any scenario that you see, where Zach Wilson is not the starting quarterback next year?
No, I don't. I mean, the kid's ceiling is so high. And yes, he takes some risk and he fumbles and he can throw some picks. But, I think his ceiling's so high and what he's able to do opens the playbook for BYU staff and allows them to do a whole bunch of different looks and different variations of the offense. Baylor Romney's great, and he came in and he wasn't super flashy, but he got the job done and didn't turn the ball over. That's the biggest thing about Baylor Romney is he threw the one interception against Utah State, but other than that, he didn't throw an interception. And so it's a kid that just took care of the game, had very easy passes, very easy reads, and did as the coaches told him. Where Zach comes out, he's more of a gunslinger. He likes to get out of the pocket, likes to run and create. So for Zach, he's just got to kind of harness that in. Keep in mind, this last offseason for Zach, he was still nursing the shoulder surgery that he had. Didn't get really a chance to refine his football skills. And so this offseason, I think he heads into it pretty healthy, and he'll have a spring ball underneath his belt and a whole offseason during the summertime to work on that timing with his receivers, et cetera. So I expect this next year for him to take a big step. I expect for him to be smarter. I mean, that kid's a gamer as well. It's a kid that you can tell that when they lose, it hurts him the most. And so you get enough of those losses underneath your belt, and you start to learn and when you can and can't take risks. And I expect him to be a better player next year as upperclassman and be a leader of the team and, hopefully have a better year, put up better numbers for sure.
Last thing, David, and we'll set you loose on a Tuesday. Appreciate the time as always. Hard to believe, but it's been a decade since BYU declared independence. It's crazy that it's been 10 years, but Tom Homo had some comments, and I thought he was very honest while being very optimistic, but also realistic as well. I think Tom's a hell of a athletic director and a really good dude. But as you look back on this decade, how would you best summarize the 10 years now that we have of independence for BYU?
Listen, I think it's been successful. I mean, I played in an era when BYU, we played on Versus and the Mountain, where my family back in Texas couldn't watch the game. We had to do a sling box from my grandparents' house in Orem so they could watch it on a blurry television down in Texas because the feed wasn't strong enough. I mean, it was brutal times. And so for BYU to move forward and get this ESPN contract, go independent. You can't deny the fact that they're playing in big-time venues against big-time opponents and on ABC, ESPN. I mean, it's very rare. BYU has one, maybe two games a year where they're not on ESPN or one of the big networks. And so I think as far as exposure goes and for BYU fans to follow the program, it's been a plus. Now you've just got to win. And in order for BYU to be relevant, you have to win. That's what it comes down to. That's what it comes down to for any program. You just have to win. And BYU the last few years hasn't done that. Followed up with this year's 7-6. And so Kalani knows that. I'm sure that Tom stressed that to him in his contract extension that, he's getting an extension, but he's got to go out there and produce better than he's been doing. And I know Kalani feels that as well, and the whole coaching staff, everybody does. So it doesn't get any easier, and they know that as well. But I think BYU's continue to build that depth, and you've got a coaching staff that, keep in mind, this was Kalani's first time to be a head coach, so he was learning as well. And now he's got 4 years underneath his belt and can kind of move forward. So I'm excited about BYU football. There's no question. Everybody wants to be in a conference. We've talked about this before, Spence. Everybody wants to be in a conference, but BYU, there's no way you can take a step back and go back to the Mountain West. Mainly because for me it means nothing. I mean, if BYU were to go win the Mountain West next year, who cares? I mean, I've told us before, I have 2 Mountain Conference championship rings, and I don't ever wear them because nobody cares that I have 2 Mountain Conference championship rings. It doesn't mean anything. Of course, there's memories there, and it was fun to go 11-2 back-to-back years. But at the end of the day, it's not significant in this current landscape. And so I think BYU stays on this independence course and keeps plugging along, and hopefully when there's a realignment, they get swept up and get to join a conference. But in the meantime, I think it's their best option. And like I said, if they can win, they become relevant, you become ranked, and you get bumped from ESPN2 to maybe ESPN or ABC, like we saw with the USC game this year, and you get more exposure. So I think it's working. It's as Tom mentioned, it's not easy and it's not ideal, but I think it's our best option at this time, and I think you keep plugging away with it.
Good stuff as always, David. Well put. Thanks for the time on a Tuesday, and thanks for your participation all year long for BYU football. We're going to keep bugging you. You're not free from us altogether, but always appreciate your time, man. Happy New Year. Be well. We'll chat soon, all right?
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Mr.